you're looking at, my opinion is, you're looking at one of the most vital economic drivers of the next 10 to 15 years. And I think if you're going to be a world leader in the economic standpoint, but also from the military and the intelligence standpoint, you have to control, you have to be the leader in this technology. If you're not the leader, you cannot be that far behind. And right now, I believe the gap is not closing. I think it's widening between us and China.
The bans on Huawei technologies continue to escalate as Canada announced a ban on the company's equipment in May, and now the EU is ramping up pressure. To what extent do Chinese telecom companies actually pose a risk to national security for Western countries? We'll be examining this issue along with the future of 5G technologies and telecommunications companies with Hugh Odom, president of Vertical Consultants, a telecom and cell tower consulting firm that has provided counsel for entities like Disney, McDonald's, and the U.S. Postal Service. Hugh, welcome to the David Lynn Report. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
So, Hugh, we'll be talking about telecommunications companies as an investment theme and also the future development of 5G technology. But first, let's start with some recent news. So this coming out of Europe, the EU industry chief, Thierry Breton, on Thursday urged more EU countries to join the 10 that have restricted or banned China's Huawei and ZTE from their 5G telecoms networks, citing risks to their bloc's collective security. This according to a Reuters article that came out on June 15th. According to Breton, he said that to date, only 10 of them have used these prerogatives to restrict or exclude high-risk vendors. This is too slow, and it poses a major security risk and exposes the union's collective security since it creates a major dependency for the EU and serious vulnerabilities. So let's examine this. What kinds of national security risks does Huawei and perhaps other Chinese telecoms companies actually pose to the EU and its allies?
Well, with regards to what the recent announcement you mentioned, it's something that's going back several years, about 4 or 5 years, that this has been determined by both the European nations and by the United States as a national security risk because of the equipment that's being placed on cell towers across the United States and across Europe and the globe, that this equipment is collecting data and almost is acting as a Trojan horse when inputted into these countries. There's been several studies in saying that not only is this equipment collecting that data, under Article 7 of the Chinese intelligence law, any company or person has to report information back to China, the actual government. So what the concern is that these countries are letting Huawei, more particularly, inside their country, basically, again, allowing China inside their country to collect this data. And Huawei has this obligation to transport that over to China if required. And the issue is twofold. One, Huawei is getting inside these companies, and how they're getting inside these companies is really brilliant. What is happening is China is subsidizing, that being the nation of China, is subsidizing Huawei and allowing Huawei to severely underprice competitors like Samsung, Nokia, Ericsson. And as a result, these countries are buying this equipment and they're relying upon it. The second thing is, right now, as mentioned, 10 countries have decided to start restricting this equipment. But the problem is the other 17 aren't. And in addition, Germany most recently is considering this. The issue is not only restricting, it's going to cost tens of billions of dollars to remove the equipment that's already up there. So they're kind of in a situation where they've gotten themselves into this situation where Huawei is there. They're trying to get out of it from future issues, but they all have to get out from the current issues because the equipment's already collecting data and they can't remove it. They don't have the money to remove it right now.
Well, what exactly are they restricting? Are they restricting Huawei's access to their 5G networks, or are they restricting Huawei to build 5G networks in Europe?
They're mostly restricting. The primary is the equipment that's being sold by Huawei to the countries itself and to the carriers, et cetera. So what happens is Huawei is the largest producer of 5G technology. And as a result, they are the ones that produce most of it. They hold the most patents. They control 5G for the most part on the equipment side. So to build out the networks, if you're a country, if you're a wireless carrier, you have to buy this equipment. And especially if you're a smaller carrier, more particularly in the United States, you're buying this equipment because it's cheaper. As I mentioned, it's being subsidized by the Chinese government. So what's happening is if you're wanting to build out 5G, most likely in the United States and around the world, you're using Huawei equipment to some degree.
The EU is not the only economic bloc to deem Huawei is a national security threat. The U.S., as you mentioned, has long viewed Huawei as a threat to national security. Can you outline the various concerns of Huawei in regards to national security, for the U.S. at least?
Well, from the U.S. perspective, what's happening now, the U.S. government has basically stated that it's a national security risk because of the data collection issues. What they're saying is that this equipment is unsecure. And basically, think of it this way, you're driving down the road, especially in rural America, and you hit off of a cell tower. That information is being moved through the equipment on that cell tower. Some of that equipment is Huawei based, is China based. The collection of the data is then processed and pushed over, and if need be, taken by the Chinese government. So what the U.S. is saying on a grand scope is that data is at suspect. And this is not just individuals. This is sites, especially in rural America, near military installations and intelligence installations, that a collection of data goes on. This is something we're seeing. It's amazing the amount of cell sites with Huawei equipment around military bases throughout the United States. So you're seeing this on a U.S. base, and as you mentioned, on a global base, that Huawei and the Chinese government have used this, again, as a way to get in and collect data to gain superiority in intelligence gathering around the world.
Canada, this news follows Canada as well, which also banned Huawei from its telecoms networks. I think members of the Five Eyes intelligence community, so Canada, Australia, the U.S., Britain, they've all taken measures to curb Huawei from gaining access to the 5G networks. Is there any evidence that the intelligence community has presented that demonstrates that Huawei is indeed spying on either corporate entities and or government officials?
There's been some anecdotal situations where they found some intelligence gathering in certain instances on a private and a public scope. There hasn't been a full scope of this with regards to saying, here's the smoking gun. But as I mentioned before, the issue is if Huawei is collecting data, which there's a great belief it is, that, again, they have an obligation to the Chinese government. It's not something that's kind of an agreement. They have an obligation by law if the Chinese government makes them turn over this information. So it's a situation by which there's somewhat a perception by Huawei and the Chinese government, there's some separation of those two entities. And in reality, there's not, both based upon legal requirements by the Chinese government and also financial incentives that the Chinese government has provided Huawei, has been able to allow them to subsidize their business and to lower prices, which allows them, again, to build out these networks.
And do you think the phones that they make are going to be banned in the West as well?
Yes. I mean, that's the yes. They're going to get, with regards to, I think what you're going to, there's some ways they could sneak that through basically through other manufacturers. But I think what you're going to see eventually is really a crackdown on all Huawei equipment from basically phones all the way up to the 5G network, from the infrastructure, I mean, with the actual equipment that goes on the cell towers, et cetera. So you're going to see, as you mentioned, EU is moving that way. The United States has already moved that way, Canada, et cetera. That is going to be the course of action. Now, there's a back and forth. China is not standing still and saying, hey, we're just going to allow this. They're shooting back, and they're putting some restrictions on U.S. and European countries as well.
Do you know if it's just Huawei that they're making restrictions on or banning? I mean, Huawei is not the only Chinese telco provider, certainly one of the biggest. There's also Xiaomi off the top of my head, Oppo. Any restrictions and bans on other Chinese phone companies? Yeah,
so there are, with regards to a level of restrictions on most Chinese companies. It's mostly focused on Huawei, though, because of, as I mentioned, they're the global leader by far in this equipment. They hold the most patents with regards to this equipment. So it's kind of going after the big game first and then taking off the smaller companies after that. But basically, I guess I can put it this way. Any company coming out of China that's building out 5G networks, they're suspect to restrictions just because, again, the tie between those companies and the Chinese government.
Hugh, you're an attorney by background. Tell us about the legal sort of ramifications of this. What's Huawei's response, first of all? I mean, do they have grounds to sue these countries for pushing them out?
Well, they've taken action through the federal government, federal court system a couple of years ago when the U.S., I think it was back in 2019, put the ban on place. And they took that all that way, and there was nothing they can do. That you can't really say that you cannot restrict certain imports into the country. I mean, we have a way of doing that with all types of products. So if there's a belief by which national security is at a concern because of equipment, then I think the federal judicial system has said that, hey, that's a valid reason for restrictions. The same thing goes on, as I mentioned. Same thing goes on with regards to the U.S. being banned from certain products in China and other parts of Asia. So it's not a situation by which this doesn't go back and forth. This is just on a grander scale, but because both countries, the U.S. and China and the world, understands the importance of 5G and telecommunications technology because of the importance on a military basis, intelligence basis, economic basis. The U.S. understood that back when they were the leader in 4G technology. It gave them a head up, a lead across the world. China understands that now with regards to not only 5G technology, but also with regards to 6G technology. This is a global race with regards to technology. If you control technology on the telecommunication side, you control a lot of different aspects, but mostly you control data, because as much as we could move data back and forth, all these different applications, et cetera, if you control the network, the infrastructure, you have the ability to collect data and control data and throttle data. So it's basically, think of it, you may have the fastest car in the world, but if you control the roads, if I control the road you can drive on and I can do whatever I want to, I control you.
I remember reading a bunch of articles coming out of 2019, and I'm looking them up right now. They're all entitled, How 5G Will Transform the Way We Live and Work. I think if somebody has a great headline, a bunch of other media sites just copy the same headline because it works. Catchy headline. How 5G Will Transform the Way We Live and Work. Has it transformed the way we live and work? It's been a few years since the technology has rolled out already, and let's do an evaluation. Let's do a report card check on how 5G has actually transformed the way we lived and worked.
Well, I would say it's changed the way we live and work a little bit. What we're getting right now is, I would say, is a lot of hype and not a lot of product. And we are getting 5G light. What I mean by that is, you turn on the TV every night, you'll see all the major carriers saying 5G, 5G, 5G. It's a marketing campaign. Go buy my phone, buy our service, et cetera, because we're going to provide all this 5G coverage and all these great things. The problem is the infrastructure hasn't been built out completely. We are at a small fraction of the capability of 5G in the United States. And what needs to happen is, we're kind of getting restricted on two different levels. The level is that, one, the companies aren't building out fast enough. They're not maintaining the growth they should have to fulfill the promises of 5G. The second is, there's a lot of governmental restrictions. So those regulations are kind of keeping them throttled in as well. Now, I will say that's the US. In Asia, mostly, 5G is well ahead of us with regards to its capabilities from an economic standpoint, from a medical standpoint, from a educational standpoint, et cetera. It is changing the course of those dynamics. They understand that 5G can be a leader in the next revolution pertaining to industrial revolution, that we go to a data revolution of being able to control data and also control technology through telecommunication services. So in the US, we're behind. It's overpromise, underdeliver. In certain parts of the world, they're up to par. I wouldn't say they're exceeding expectations, but they're up to par where they should be.
Certainly, I've seen promises from major metropolitan cities in the West for delivering high-speed wireless internet in the cities. I'm based in Canada, but even if I go to New York or Toronto or any of these bigger cities in North America, I don't get free Wi-Fi anywhere. Is that something that you think is going to happen in the foreseeable future?
With regards to across the globe, I mean, everybody kind of getting the same kind of service.
Yeah, if you just get free high-speed Wi-Fi in a public area supplied by the city. I know people are testing it, but I don't see it being rolled out on a massive scale just yet.
I think the quick answer is no, because I think what you're going to see selective situations. I think what you're always going to see is a divide between certain areas of the country, whether it be in Canada, US, or anywhere else. You're going to have high density population areas the first to achieve this, and then lesser densely populated areas falling behind. And that it becomes in the United States, it's basically what we term as a digital divide. So you have the have and the have-nots. You'll see upgrades in what you're able to get, but you're always going to see separation. It's mostly because at the end of the day, it's a return on investment for the wireless carriers. They're going to go where the densest populated areas are and where they can sell the most service. So, but you're seeing this, again, this is getting farther and farther apart. So if you're in areas in the US, if you're in a rural area versus a highly densely populated area, urban area, you're going to see that separation grow and grow and grow and grow. And that's something that we've seen across the globe, but we haven't really seen in the United States as drastic as it is becoming.
Going back to the Huawei case, do you think that there's going to be retaliation from the Chinese government?
Yes, I think it's already happening. I think that with regards to on a infrastructure build out level, you're seeing everything from the equipment being sold that goes on the towers to the actual microchips and the equipment, et cetera. You're seeing a basically back and forth. What happens is the U.S. will say, look, we're going to use these companies. We're going to stay at home and use certain companies to build out our equipment, and we're going to ban Chinese manufacturers. And what happens then is that the Chinese will say, well, we're going to restrict certain companies that are selling in China and throughout other parts of Asia. We're going to basically have a coalition to ban those companies. So what you're seeing is a bunch of shots back and forth because they understand, again, not only from an economic standpoint, but from a global intelligence and military standpoint, the importance of controlling this technology with regards to 5G. And we're about 6-7 years away, I would say, plus there's probably 7 from the kickoff of 6G technology. So we're in the middle of one battle, and the next battle is on the horizon.
And what's the ultimate outcome of this tit for tat, you think?
Well, I think right now, if you're asking me who's kind of winning the game, I'd say the China is, and because they're so, in my opinion, they're so far ahead of the U.S. with regards to 5G technology. And again, just for example, we're talking about Huawei and other Chinese companies being infiltrated into the U.S. It's not the same on the other side. It's not the European countries in the U.S. are infiltrated into Asian countries, especially China. So you already have, they already have, as I mentioned, the Trojan horse already inside our country. But with regards to technology, the only promising thing I think we can look at is we led the world in 4G technology. We're behind. We're not leading the world in 5G. We need to, and I think the government has started to focus on this, and private enterprise as well, is we need to lead the world in 6G technology. The only difference is, whereas 4G, we were so far ahead, we just kind of rolled into that technology. Now it's a competition. And when you have somebody that's focused on it like China, it's going to be a battle of who gets there first and who controls that technology going forward into the next few decades.
One could make the argument that this is purely political because China's already blocked major U.S. Tech companies from operating. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, all banned.
Well, there's definitely a political component to it. I mean, I wouldn't deny that. I think it's, again, a situation by which there is a political kind of gamesmanship between the two countries. But I think ultimately you're looking at, my opinion is, you're looking at one of the most vital economic drivers of the next 10 to 15 years. And I think if you're going to be a world leader in the economic standpoint, but also from the military and the intelligence standpoint, you have to be the leader in this technology. If you're not the leader, you cannot be that far behind. And right now, I believe the gap is not closing. I think it's widening between us and China.
So let's bring it back to the U.S. And we'll talk about what the telco companies are doing right now. What are the priorities of telecoms companies right now in terms of growth, in terms of improving the consumer experience?
Sure. I think the priority right now for any telecommunication companies in the U.S. based and the largest telco carriers, they're trying to do two things. One, they understand that the product they're selling, more particularly 5G, is not going very well with the consumer on a business level and a general consumer level. So they're trying to make sure they're pushing out this technology as fast as possible and providing the customer as much service as possible. One thing about that is the most options, because this technology provides them, that being the carrier, the telco carrier, two things. It provides them the ability to retain the existing customer, and secondly, to provide additional services that they can sell off to new customers as well. The biggest issue right now for these telco companies from a financial standpoint is their capital expenditures are so huge. compared to what the return on the investment has been for 5G technology. It is not working out very well for them right now. And so they got to figure out a way to cut down the CapEx expense and keep on growing. The subscriber levels and the usage levels are actually coming down comparatively where they were years ago. Companies like Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile are not seeing the exponential growth they thought that 5G would push out there. So they have to, and they've spent a tremendous amount of money trying to promote this and trying to build it out. So the CapEx is high and the return on investment is significantly lower than they expected.
If you just do a quick Google search of the countries with the cheapest or most expensive internet packages in the world, for example, you've got countries like places in Latin America or Eastern Europe consistently ranking amongst the cheapest countries with the cheapest broadband packages. Why is it that in the U.S., presumably one of the most, if not the most technologically developed country in the world, has for the consumer more expensive broadband and internet packages than less developed countries around the world?
Two reasons that I can think of off the top of my head. One, the tremendous cost of build out of the infrastructure, not only from the actual physical cost, but the regulation cost of the hindrance you have compared to maybe a smaller country that's more government backed with regards to the build out of their network. So you have a lot bigger cost associated with that. You have something called a profit margin as well that you have to look out for as well. And then the other issue is you're not comparing apples to apples. If you go to a smaller country, the internet service, the broadband service, the wireless service is not on par with the U.S. I mean, now I would say if you go to certain Asian countries, you're going to get a better service than you would in the U.S. or certain European countries. So we're kind of in the middle to the upper level, but we're not the best, but we're not the worst. So you can't compare maybe our cost to somebody else's cost if they're lower, because we have additional cost on our side for build out, but also we're probably providing a greater level of service from internet and telecommunication purposes.
Okay. And finally, for the investor watching this who's probably wondering how to pick telco companies to invest in, if you just take a look at the U.S. listed companies, for example, AT&T or Verizon, just to name a few off the top of my head, what are the metrics you would be looking for to evaluate whether or not, let's say, Verizon is a better investment right now than, let's say, AT&T?
Personally, I wouldn't pick any of them. I think they're all in a bad position. I think if you're looking to get in the telecommunications industry for investment purposes, you need to look at infrastructure, the build out. That's where the money is. The money's not in the service anymore. The money's in actually the equipment itself and the build out of that. Don't buy cars, buy roads. I always say, if you understand you're going to have to continue to build out the infrastructure for 5G, 6G, et cetera, you're going to own the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is a lot more valuable than the service. So I'd be looking at companies who build out particularly for 5G equipment, 5G technology, and those companies are going to see growth. And there's a lot of good buys out there on smaller to mid-level companies that are going to continue to build out. And if the U.S. does right and we start bringing this home and start building it here, there's going to be a lot of U.S.-based companies. They're going to have a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money and be very profitable going forward.
Yeah. Well, at least you live in the U.S. where you've got hundreds of options. I'm in Canada. There's only I think 3 major telco companies that have basically an oligopoly.
Well, the border's open, and you can, we welcome you to the U.S.
Thank you, Hugh. Thank you. I'll consider it. Our internet bills are not pretty either, but thank you very much for your time today, Hugh. And where can we learn more about your work and your company?
Well, anybody wants to learn about us, just go to our website, which is vertical-consultants.com. Again, that's vertical-consultants.com.
All right. We'll put a link in the description down below. Thank you again for your time, Hugh.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.